3 months before my son's wedding, his fiancée looked me in the eyes and said, "Either you stay out of our lives, or I'll make sure you never see your grandchildren." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, but I didn't flinch. I've learned that when someone shows you their true nature, you don't argue with it, you remember it. You catalog it. You let it burn into your memory until it becomes fuel. I'm holding this photograph right now, it's creased and worn from years of handling. It shows me and my late wife, Maria, on the day we started our cleaning business 30 years ago. We're standing in front of our first commercial account, a small office building downtown. We look young and hopeful and completely unaware of what the world was going to throw at us. Maria's gone now, cancer took her when our son Noah was just 12, but her spirit lives in every decision I've made since. Harper, that's the fiancée's name, she thinks I'm just a retired janitor with no future. She sees my weathered hands, my modest home, my old pickup truck, and she's written my entire story without ever bothering to read the first chapter. What she doesn't know is that I quietly own the very event hall where she plans to hold her perfect wedding. What she doesn't know could fill libraries. If you've ever been judged by your past, stay to the end, this story will make you proud of every scar you earned. Because scars aren't marks of defeat. They're proof you survived battles that would have destroyed weaker souls. My name is Elijah Moreno, and I'm 58 years old. I've been a widower for 16 years, raising my son alone after losing the love of my life to an illness that drained our savings and broke my heart but never broke my will. I learned to braid my daughter-in-law's hair for school pictures. I learned to cook meals that didn't come from boxes. I learned to be both mother and father to a boy who needed stability more than he needed perfection. I worked nights cleaning office buildings so I could be home when Noah got back from school. I mopped floors and emptied trash cans and scrubbed toilets while other fathers were home watching television or playing golf. But I was building something, not just a business, but a foundation. Every late night, every sore back, every moment when I questioned whether I was doing enough, it was all building towards something larger than myself. Now Noah is 28, and he's engaged to Harper Whitmore. Harper comes from what she calls old money, the kind of family that's never had to worry about whether the lights would stay on or the rent would be paid. Her father owns a chain of luxury car dealerships. Her mother organizes charity galas where the cost of a single centerpiece could feed a family for a month. They live in a world where image matters more than substance, where your worth is measured by your zip code and your shoes. From the moment Noah brought Harper home to meet me, I felt her judgment like a cold wind. She walked into my modest duplex, the same one where I raised my son, where Maria and I shared our dreams, where we celebrated Noah's first steps and his high school graduation, and I watched her eyes catalog every imperfection. The worn furniture we couldn't afford to replace. The family photos in simple frames instead of expensive ones. The kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals, marked with rings from coffee cups and scratches from homework assignments. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give to children or pets, patronizing and distant. When I offered her coffee, she asked if I had anything organic. When I showed her Maria's garden in the backyard, she wondered aloud if the aesthetic might be modernized. When I told her about the community center where I volunteered on weekends, teaching financial literacy to single parents, she nodded politely and changed the subject to the wedding venue. The small humiliation started almost immediately. She would correct my pronunciation of words I've been saying correctly my entire life. When I brought gifts, simple things, meaningful things, like the handmade cutting board I'd crafted for their kitchen, she would thank me with the same tone you'd use for a well-meaning but clueless relative. She told people, Elijah used to clean schools before retirement, as if my life's work was something to be explained away rather than respected. The worst part wasn't her disrespect. I've dealt with condescending people before. The worst part was watching my son, my Noah, stay silent. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the way he'd tense up when she made her little comments, but he never spoke up. Not once. He was torn between loyalty to the man who raised him and embarrassment about where he came from. That silence cut deeper than any insult Harper could have delivered. But here's what Harper doesn't know, what she's never bothered to discover: I don't just used to clean schools. I own the janitorial corporation that maintains over 40 government buildings across 3 counties. Moreno Commercial Services isn't just a cleaning company, it's an empire built one contract at a time, one satisfied client at a time, one reputation at a time. 30 years ago, when Maria and I started with a single contract at that downtown office building, we made a promise to each other: we would never forget where we came from, and we would never apologize for the honest work that built our dreams. When the business started growing, when we could afford better equipment and larger contracts, we kept that promise. When we could have moved to a bigger house in a fancier neighborhood, we stayed in our duplex because it was home. I live modestly not because I have to, but because I choose to. I drive my worn pickup truck not because I can't afford better, but because it reminds me that transportation is about getting from point A to point B, not about impressing strangers at red lights. I keep a low profile not because I'm ashamed of my success, but because I learned that real power doesn't need to announce itself. When I walk through the buildings my company maintains, employees greet me with genuine respect: "Good morning, Mr. Moreno, sir." Tenants stop to shake my hand and ask about my family. City officials know my name and trust my word. But Harper only sees the cleaner, a man in work clothes with dirt under his fingernails and calluses on his palms. What she doesn't see is the stack of contracts on my desk at home, including one labeled Horizon Hall, lease renewal. Horizon Hall, where she's planning her dream wedding. The same venue where she's spent months obsessing over every detail, from the imported Italian marble floors to the crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. She doesn't know that every time she's walked through those doors, every time she's admired the elegance and prestige of the location, she's been walking through a building I own. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so painful. 3 weeks before the wedding, Harper came to my house with what she called wedding paperwork. She brought a folder with her, thick and official-looking, and her demeanor was different, more businesslike, more coldly determined. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Noah had done his homework for 12 years, where Maria and I had shared our morning coffee and planned our future. Harper opened the folder and pulled out several documents. The first was titled Family Image Agreement, in formal legal font. My hands, these weathered hands that had built everything I owned, trembled slightly as I read through the conditions she was presenting. First, I could not attend the wedding in my work clothes. I would need to purchase appropriate formal wear that met her family's standards. She had included a list of acceptable men's stores and a suggested budget that was 3 times what I'd spent on clothing in the past 5 years combined. Second, I must not speak publicly about my humble beginnings during any wedding festivities. No stories about cleaning buildings, no mentions of financial struggles, no references to working multiple jobs to support my family. My past was to be sanitized for public consumption. Third, I should consider selling my duplex and moving to a more appropriate residence that would reflect better on the family's image. She had included real estate listings for condominiums in what she called suitable neighborhoods, sterile places with names like Executive Gardens and Presidential Estates. But the fourth condition was the one that made my blood run cold. I was expected to limit my interactions with any future grandchildren to appropriate occasions and supervised visits. She didn't want my influence, my values, my history contaminating the next generation of her family. As I read through this document, this contract for my own dignity, Harper sat across from me with the satisfied expression of someone who believed she held all the cards. She had anticipated every objection, prepared every argument, assumed every outcome. In her mind, I was a problem to be managed, an embarrassment to be contained, a relic of poverty to be hidden away. When I finished reading, I looked up at her and saw something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone: contempt. Not just disrespect or condescension, but actual contempt. She despised everything I represented. She hated that her perfect fairy tale romance came with the baggage of a working-class father-in-law. She resented that her future children would have to claim me as family. She leaned forward and delivered the final insult with surgical precision. We can't build a legacy on poverty, Elijah. Noah deserves better than to be dragged down by this. She gestured around my kitchen, my home, my life with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, the refrigerator humming, the sound of children playing in the street outside. Normal sounds of a normal life that she found so offensive. I didn't sign her papers. I didn't argue with her conditions. I didn't defend my choices or justify my existence. Instead, I looked her in the eye and said quietly, "A legacy built on shame never lasts." She gathered her documents with sharp, efficient movements, clearly frustrated by my lack of compliance. "I hope you'll reconsider," she said as she headed for the door. "For Noah's sake." After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time, holding that old photograph of Maria and me. I thought about the promises we'd made to each other, about the values we tried to instill in our son, about the difference between earning respect and demanding it. Maria would have handled this situation with more grace than I felt capable of, but she would have reached the same conclusion: some battles are worth fighting, not because you want to, but because you have to. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Not out of anger, anger makes you sloppy, makes you reactive instead of strategic, but out of necessity. I'd spent 30 years building something solid, something meaningful, and I wasn't going to let anyone tear it down with shame and ultimatums. "Richard," I said when he answered, "I need you to review all our contracts and make sure everything is current and legally sound." Richard Chen had been my attorney for 15 years. He'd helped me navigate the complex world of commercial contracts, liability issues, and business expansion. He knew my company better than anyone except me. "Is there a problem, Elijah?" "Not yet," I said. "But there might be soon. I need to make sure I'm protected." Next, I called my accountant, Margaret Santos. She'd been handling my books since the early days when my accounting system was a shoebox full of receipts and a calculator from the dollar store. "Margaret, I want to quietly transfer some company shares to Noah. Can you prepare the paperwork?" "Of course," she said. "How much are we talking about?" 49%, I said. "I want him to have a real stake in what we've built." "That's generous, Elijah. What's the occasion?" I was quiet for a moment, looking out my window at the neighborhood where I'd raised my son. It's time he understood what we're really worth. Then I made one more call, this one to Marcus Rivera, the event manager at Horizon Hall. Marcus had worked for me for 8 years before I'd helped him get his current position. He was one of the hardest workers I'd ever employed, and more importantly, he was someone I trusted. "Marcus, it's Elijah." "Mr. Moreno. How are you, sir? How's Noah? I heard about the wedding, congratulations." "Thank you, Marcus. That's actually why I'm calling. I need a favor." "Anything, sir. You know that. I want to make a special donation to the Community Scholarship Fund on the day of the wedding. I'll need you to make sure I'm present when the bride arrives, and I'll need access to the microphone system." "Of course, sir. Should I coordinate with the wedding planner?" "No," I said. "This will be a surprise." The week leading up to the wedding was surreal. Harper had organized a glamorous rehearsal dinner at one of the city's most expensive restaurants, the kind of place where the appetizers cost more than most people spend on entire meals. The guest list read like a who's who of local society: politicians, business owners, socialites, and influencers. Everyone who was anyone, according to Harper's definition of worth. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner straight from work, still wearing my company uniform. It wasn't intentional disrespect. I genuinely had been working late, reviewing quarterly reports and preparing for a major contract renewal. But the moment I walked into that restaurant, I felt the wave of whispers and sideways glances. Harper was holding court near the bar, resplendent in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place like a mask. She excused herself from her conversation and glided over to where I stood. "Elijah," she said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to fool casual observers, "we agreed you'd dress properly for family events." The word "properly" hit like a slap. As if 30 years of honest work had somehow made me improper. As if the uniform that represented everything I'd built was something to be ashamed of. "I came from work," I said simply. "Some of us still earn our keep." Her laugh was crystalline and cold. "Oh, I know how hard you work. Everyone does." She gestured toward the microphone at the front of the room. "In fact, I was just about to thank you publicly for cleaning the venue for free. Such a thoughtful father-in-law, volunteering his janitorial services for our special day." The crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the subtle drama playing out between us. I could see Noah across the room, his face pale with mortification. He looked like he wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and emerge somewhere far away from this moment. Harper took the microphone with practiced ease. She was in her element now, the center of attention, the gracious bride-to-be acknowledging the help of the working class. "I'd like to take a moment to thank my future father-in-law, Elijah Moreno, for all his behind-the-scenes work making our wedding possible. He's been so generous with his cleaning services at the venue." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She was painting me as the hired help, the grateful servant working for free out of family obligation. The crowd murmured appreciatively, impressed by her graciousness in acknowledging the little people who made their elegant lives possible. But I'd heard enough. I walked calmly to where she stood and held out my hand for the microphone. Confused but not wanting to cause a scene, she handed it over. The room fell silent, waiting to hear what the humble janitor had to say. "Thank you, Harper," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the restaurant's sound system. "You're right that I've been involved with the venue preparations. But there's been a small misunderstanding." I paused, letting the silence build, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "I didn't clean Horizon Hall," I said quietly. "I own it." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't justify. I simply handed the microphone back to Harper, whose face had gone white as marble, and walked out of the restaurant. Behind me, I could hear the eruption of confused voices, the scattered whispers, the sharp intake of breath from people trying to process what they'd just heard. But I didn't look back. I'd said what needed to be said. The rest could wait for tomorrow. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect September mornings that makes you believe in fresh starts and happy endings. Horizon Hall looked magnificent. The staff had outdone themselves with the decorations, the flowers, the careful attention to every detail that Harper had obsessed over for months. I arrived early, not as a guest but as the owner of the venue. I wanted to walk through the space one more time, to see it through my own eyes rather than through Harper's vision of perfection. The Italian marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. The imported flowers filled the air with their subtle fragrance. The tables were set with china and crystal that caught the morning light like jewels. It was beautiful. Undeniably, breathtakingly beautiful. And every square inch of it was mine. Marcus found me in the main hall, looking over the seating arrangements. Everything's ready, Mr. Moreno. The scholarship donation ceremony is scheduled for right before the processional begins. Perfect, I said. Has the banner arrived? Yes, sir. It's hanging in the storage room, ready to be deployed on your signal. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to go. I'd hoped that Harper would come to see me as more than just an obstacle to her perfect life. I'd hoped that Noah would find the courage to stand up for his family, his history, his father. I'd hoped that love would be stronger than social climbing and image management. But hope doesn't always align with reality. The guests began arriving around noon, a parade of luxury cars and designer outfits, of air kisses and practiced small talk. I watched from the manager's office as Harper's family and friends filled the venue, all of them perfectly groomed and appropriately dressed for the social event of the season. Harper herself arrived in a limousine, surrounded by her bridesmaids like a queen with her court. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace that probably cost more than I'd spent on my house. She looked radiant, triumphant, completely in control of her perfect day. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock. At 1:45, I made my way to the main hall, where the guests were taking their seats and the photographer was capturing every moment for posterity. Noah stood at the altar with his groomsmen, handsome in his tuxedo but visibly nervous. He kept glancing toward the back of the hall, probably wondering if I would show up, probably hoping I wouldn't cause a scene. At exactly 1:50, Marcus approached me with the microphone system activated. The guests quieted, expecting some routine announcement about the ceremony beginning.